As you guys know, the Trump tariffs has hit not just the fashion industry, but actually all industries by storm, including the stock market. I mean, if you look at the S&P 500, there are all these reports that stock prices have gone crazy recently. Look at how much it's dropped. This is on the 2nd of April, and then it just absolutely tanked on the 3rd, and since then the S&P 500 has been tanking. Loads of brands, their stocks have absolutely tanked because of Trump's tariffs. Fashion stocks have also tanked. We've seen the likes of Kering stock tanking, many other conglomerates that stock was tanking. So it was definitely a reckoning day for a lot of industries, not just fashion. Someone's asking me to look at Kering stock. Let's look at Kering stock let's put it on the screen. Okay, it's up today. You have to look at the past 5 days, and then you can see it's down by quite a lot over the past 5 days. But it's up today though. I guess that's a positive sign. It's someone saying buy the dip, but that's hilarious. Yeah, so anyway, what I wanted to do, there's this amazing article via BBC explaining exactly what the tariffs are. I've already explained why Trump is doing these tariffs and why they are happening, but for people that are new, you might be new, you might have not ever seen my content before, we'll go through it again just so that you can get that level of context. So here it is. So Trump claims that a 10% tariff on all nations and much higher rates of up to 50% on individual countries will boost the US economy and protect jobs. And I think, to pause there, it's a very simplistic way of looking at things. It's ultra simplistic. And that's one thing I don't like about politics, because I've just been observing kind of people's opinions online about what they think about the tariffs, whether they agree with it, whether they disagree. And it tends to be, if you're politically on the left, you just completely disagree. And if you're politically on the right, you're just like, Trump knows what he's doing and everything that Trump does is amazing. So that's the thing I don't like about when we mix issues of politics with like the economy and all that sort of stuff, because people tie emotions into what actually is a very like tangible thing that will affect everyone worldwide. So I find it really strange how people are so politically blind about things like this. They just stay with like their political party and not even consider anything about it. It's really weird. But when I see things like this, I always think of, where is the money coming from? Who is paying for it? And which companies are given more leeway? Because the whole point of Trump doing these, and I'm sure we'll read this further on in the BBC article, Trump claims that a lot of countries put tariffs on the US and the US doesn't really put a lot of tariffs on them. So it's balancing the playing field. Also, by putting these massive tariffs, and they've targeted a lot of production hubs for a lot of fashion brands. So by targeting those places, these companies have absolutely no choice but to produce in the US. By producing in the US, by creating factories and infrastructure in the US, what that means is that will lead to more jobs in the US being created, more infrastructure in the US, more money into the US economy. But I think that's really simplistic because, first of all, you cannot build a factory in a day. First of all, you need the planning permission to build a factory. You have to find the land. You have to make sure that the land isn't somewhere that could like affect the surrounding area. There's so much planning that needs to go into it. You have to legally pass all the checks for these factories to build this infrastructure. You have to train loads of staff to learn how to use the machinery in a lot of these factories. You have to, there's just so many things that have to happen. It would literally take years and years and years and years to build the infrastructure. And in the meantime, companies are bleeding. The average American's wallets are bleeding. People from all over the world, their wallets are bleeding. So my question is, who pays for that in the interim? Where is this money coming from in the interim when all these companies are forced into building infrastructure in the US, when these things take so long? It's crazy, to be honest. It's crazy. And that's what I always have to ask, like, where exactly is all of this coming from? But reading on. However, there are warnings that the move could harm the world economy and push up prices for consumers in the US and around the globe. Hasn't that already happened though? Like my American friends, they're complaining about the increase in the price of eggs, amongst other things, right? They're really saying that the eggs have not been great the eggs have been really expensive recently. So that hasn't been fantastic. On tariffs, taxes charged on goods bought from other countries. Typically, they are a percentage of a product's value. For example, a 25% tariff on a $10 product would mean an additional $2.50 charge. Companies that bring the foreign goods into the country have to pay the tax to the government, and firms can choose to pass on some or all of the cost to customers. Now, this is an interesting conversation I've seen happen in fashion where people are asking who is going to eat this cost? Is it going to be the company or is it going to be the brand? And I honestly think it depends on the kind of customer base that companies have. So in luxury fashion, I think they're definitely going to pass the cost on to the customer because luxury fashion customers are less likely to be affected by things like this because they have more money. They tend to be the richer people in society, especially brands like Hermes. Hermes can increase their costs and the waiting list will still be full for their Kellys and the Birkins and stuff like that. So to be very honest, a lot of luxury brands will just pass the cost on to consumers. But for the mid-level brands and the brands that charge even lower prices, they are going to really be strongly affected by these tariffs, to be honest. And they would have to think hard about passing the cost to customers because their whole business model is it being affordable. And once it's not affordable, they basically lose almost their whole customer base. So that's crazy. Now, reading on, why is Trump using tariffs? For decades, Trump has argued that the US should use tariffs to boost its economy. He says they will encourage US consumers to buy more American-made goods, increase the amount of tax raised, and lead to huge levels of investment in the country. So I think that's a very simplistic analysis of how exactly tariffs will just completely change the US economy and everyone's going to be rich. Because why do these luxury brands or just brands in general, why do they produce in places like Bangladesh or China or Vietnam, Cambodia? Because they are low labor cost markets. And that's how these companies were able to improve their profit margins. So if these companies are now forced into going back to a high labor cost market, it just means that their revenue will increase drastically. It means that their market share will decrease drastically, and therefore these companies overall have less money. So the assumption that all this money is going to go to the US, I think it's a bit simplistic, to be honest. It doesn't actually make that much sense in reality. Like when you really think about it, it really doesn't make sense. There are also other markets that aren't as affected by the tariffs. So let's say luxury markets like Turkey, I've seen their tariffs aren't as high as the likes of like Vietnam, for example. Or I know some Latin American countries also are known for producing clothing, and they aren't hit with tariffs the same level that like a Vietnam and a China will be. So we might see a lot of luxury brands focusing on producing in the likes of Turkey, and that might actually be really good for the Turkish economy because the Turkish economy has had serious issues. The last time I was in Turkey, you had to like, especially if you're a foreigner, they would make you buy stuff with pounds or dollars because their currency was that bad. Like the Turkish lira was really, really bad. I don't know what it's like now, but this could definitely mean a positive thing for the Turkish economy. However, what you need to remember about fashion is different regions specialize in producing different things. Certain countries specialize in knitwear, certain countries specialize in denim. So by forcing countries that don't really have the expertise in certain things to produce it, we might just see the quality of things going down, which newsflash, quality has already gone down. We don't really want more of that, to be honest. I've also seen a lot of people saying that this might be good for sustainability in fashion, but that's a conversation that we'll get to later. But reading on, Trump wants to reduce the gap between the value of goods the US buys from other countries and the value of those it sells to them. He argues that America has been taken advantage of by cheaters and pillaged by foreigners. The US president has also made other demands alongside tariffs. The first announced during his current term targeted China, Mexico, and Canada after he said he wanted them to do more to stop migrants and illegal drugs reaching the US. Trump has strongly defended his tariffs announcement, but a growing number of influential voices within his Republican Party have joined opposing Democrats and foreign leaders in attacking the measures. Long-standing Trump ally and Daily Wire co-founder Ben Shapiro said they could be economically catastrophic and that the messaging behind them had been muddled. Yeah, I think, and that's the problem I have with, once again, the political conversations where people are so weird about politics where they just choose a side and then everything that person says they just follow blindly, that there's no critical thought going into actually what are the effects to the everyday person when these things happen. Like, don't people know that your groceries are going to be more expensive? Everything you buy is going to be more expensive and your wages aren't going to go up. So that just means it's basically like having some accelerated inflation without your wages inflating with the inflation. I don't know how people don't understand that. It literally just makes your life worse off. It just makes you worse off as a person in the economy. Let's see, what are Trump's reciprocal tariffs? Trump's minimum 10% tariff on all imports to the US was introduced on the 5th of April. The UK, Argentina, Australia, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia are among the countries this applies to. However, many nations will face much higher tariffs. Yeah, I've talked about most of these tariffs targeting the production hubs of a lot of fashion companies. So yeah, these tariffs include 49% on Cambodian products, 46% on Vietnamese imports, and 20% on the goods from the EU. The 20% on the EU is very interesting because, of course, a lot of luxury brands produce in EU regions. I mean, most luxury brands produce, if not in Turkey and Japan, because a lot of luxury brands produce like their denim in Turkey or Japan. They produce their knitwear in places like Portugal. They produce a lot of their leather goods in Italy, especially. A lot of brands produce in France. All of those regions are going to be affected by these things. So that's going to be a huge issue moving forward for sure. A very, very big issue. Chinese imports could face a 54% tariff and an extra 34% on top of the 20%, which had previously been announced. And that's the thing. So because Trump says one thing and then he announces something else, it's actually really hard as a business to know what region to move to, what region to focus on, what region to invest in, because he can literally turn around the next day and say, we're just going to increase it by 10%, which he has shown that he will do that. Because when we covered the Trump tariffs and what he was saying just a few weeks ago, it's so different to the tariffs he actually put in place. Like the tariffs he put in place are way worse than what he was saying when he was sort of talking about them. So you don't actually know what to expect. So it's hard for companies to plan, including American companies. So this narrative that Trump is like, yeah, everything I do is to help American companies, I personally don't buy it. I think what he's doing is actually negatively affecting American companies, and they have to pass on this cost to their consumers, and that might lead to them just losing their consumers completely. So when you look at stuff like this, for example, and I hope more of this happens, where you have companies literally adding a tariff surcharge so consumers can actually tell what exactly the price increase is caused by. So here you can see in this order, there's a $44.09 increase on this order just based on the tariffs, to be honest. So we'll see more of that. And I think it's great for companies to do that, where they make it very clear as to why there's a big price increase in what they are selling. It said, dude, you have zero specialization in economics, so it makes no sense you're lecturing on it. None of our manufacturers make goods in America. That's the whole point. So building the infrastructure is not free. Like, in a lot of these what you don't understand is that like the money has to come from somewhere, right? So when you look at like how much it actually costs to build the infrastructure and the fact that the government won't be that heavily involved in paying for these things, is damn near impossible. How does a company invest millions and millions and millions and millions, sometimes even close to billions, in infrastructure in certain regions that they produce in, and then at the drop of a bucket, they have to change that and then invest the same millions and millions and millions into America again after they've invested it elsewhere? That doesn't make any economical sense. You don't need an economics degree to understand that that doesn't make sense. And, you know, where exactly is the money coming from? Like, it's just common sense. It's literally just common sense. That's all it is. Yeah. So that's what I was alluding to earlier. A lot of people just sometimes with the political thing follow their politics blindly without actually critically thinking about anything. But let's read on. However, China said in response that it would bring in a 34% retaliatory tariff on US goods. Trump then threatened to introduce a further 50% tariff on China, meaning 104% tariff on some products. China has vowed to fight to the end. White House officials described the higher tariffs on countries Trump called the worst offenders as reciprocal. Reciprocal could mean they were based on what countries already charged the US in form of existing tariffs plus non-tariff barriers such as regulations. However, this is not what has happened for all the countries on the list. Instead, the tariff rate was calculated on the basis that it would eliminate the US goods trade deficit within each country. Some countries, including the UK, have had tariffs applied even though they buy more from the US than they sell to it. And so this is a key point here, that some countries, including the UK, have had tariffs applied even though they buy more from the US than sell to it. So for example, their claim that the tariffs that they put on is specifically to make up for the trade deficit. Two reasons why it doesn't make sense. You have it on the UK, where literally in the UK, they buy more from the US than they sell to it. So saying that you're doing that one to, balance the trade deficit doesn't make sense. Also, this only works on the assumption that everything stays the same, which it won't. So many people are going to do things in reaction to the tariffs, and then the market changes completely. And when the market changes completely, the deficits change completely also. So to be like, yeah, we're perfectly calculating the tariffs based on balancing the deficit, and then companies are like, well, you want to put tariffs on us? We're just going to move our production here or move it there. Then it completely changes the landscape of the deficit. So then you have to do it again, I guess. And then the market reacts, then you do it again, then the market reacts. And it's just going to be a constant thing that keeps on going as the market keeps reacting. It's so stupid to think that you can just make tariffs once and the market is going to stay completely the same and no one's going to change where they produce or change in response to the tariffs being announced. It's so simplistic. Like, it actually doesn't make any sense. But reading on. Will prices go up for US consumers? Many economists expect tariffs to push up prices across a range of imported goods as firms pass on some or all of their increased costs. The products affected could include everything from clothing to coffee and alcohol to electronics. Some firms may also decide to import fewer foreign goods, which could make those which are available more expensive. The price of goods manufactured in the US using imported components may also rise. For example, car parts typically cross the US, Mexican, and Canadian borders multiple times before a vehicle is completely assembled. This is interesting. So you've got the powdered aluminium sent from Tennessee, turned into rods in Pennsylvania. The rods are shaped and polished in Canada, sent directly to Mexico for assembly into pistons, and then the pistons become part of an engine in Michigan. So based on the tariffs, right, for this to actually work, and this is why, going back to the comment that someone said earlier, it actually doesn't make any sense. So in Canada, where the rods are shaped and polished, you need to move that step into the US, and then the assembly where these things are assembled into pistons in Mexico. The reason why it's assembled to pistons in Mexico is because it's a cheaper labor market. You have to also move this to the US. Who is paying for these two steps in the automotive industry to both be moved into the US? And do we know how much this is going to cost the massive American companies that produce cars in the US? Who exactly is paying for that, and how much will it cost? And can they even afford to pay for that? You have so many companies that are already struggling. I mean, General Motors, we know the issues that they are having. Can they afford to move those into the US? And that's what I mean. Like, a lot of people are just kind of blindly supporting things that they haven't really thought about in any regard. But reading on, car prices had already been expected to increase as a result of earlier tariffs. The cost of a car made using parts from Mexico and Canada alone could rise by $4,000 to $10,000, depending on the vehicle. The measures could also damage the US economy. The chance of a recession rose to 50% after Trump's announcement on new tariffs, and Trump's top officials have repeatedly played down recession fears and insisted that the tariffs would be implemented as planned. The stock markets, we don't even need to read this part. We know exactly what has happened since the stock market, it was announced, the stock markets have completely tanked across the board. This is obviously because I'm based in the UK. How will it affect the UK? So the UK exported around £58 billion of goods to the US in 2024, mainly cars, machinery, and pharmaceuticals. It was already due to be affected by the earlier tariffs targeting steel, aluminium, and car imports, or aluminum, as my Americans in the chat say. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said clearly there will be an economic impact from the 10% tariff. However, he said, US UK trade talks are ongoing and that he will fight for the best deal for Britain. And once again, this is what I mean. Those figures and those tariffs that they've put on regions, so much of the market is liable to change that it literally doesn't make sense for them to say, oh, we've perfectly calculated how we can balance the trade deficit. That literally doesn't make sense. There's no such thing as a perfect calculation for a trade deficit unless you just assume that everything stays the same, which everyone knows it won't. So let's see. Top 5 UK goods exports to the US. Cars, 9 billion. Pharmaceutical products, 6.6 billion. Mechanical power generators, aircrafts. Yeah, I know a lot of the aircrafts that we export to the US are military aircrafts because I know that we produce and export a lot of weapons to the US. That's guns, that's aircrafts, commercial and military aircraft. So that I'm definitely aware of. Obviously, cars too. We produce a lot of cars. We're reading on. How have other countries responded to the Trump tariffs? So the EU said the consequences will be dire for millions of people around the globe. Canada announced a 25% tariff on US vehicles. In Italy, they're saying that they're going to work towards a deal to prevent a trade war. In Ireland, they're saying there's no justification for the tariffs. In Australia, they're saying this is not the act of a friend. In South Korea, they're saying the global trade war has become a reality. And so this is what I'm really interested in, to see kind of all the new tariffs on all the different countries and see exactly what regions were targeted. So as you can see, 20% on the EU. We've talked about this already. Big impact on luxury brands that produce all around the EU, from Italy to France to Portugal. And so many companies produce in those regions. Of course, China, we knew that was coming already. The US and China have kind of had this for tat going on for a while now, so that was to be expected. You've got a 24% tariff on Japan, which is also a big hub for production, especially when it comes to denim. Most luxury brands produce their denim in Japan. That's going to be really crazy. You're going to see a 46% tariff on Vietnam. I just really want to know, and I'm just curious to know how exactly they're going to bring the expertise, the skills, the infrastructure, and build that quick enough in Vietnam for it not to affect American companies like a lot. Because right now they're bleeding. In the meantime, and that's the problem, like in the meantime, while all these trade deals are being made and, you know, everyone is trying to figure out where exactly they produce because Trump can change the tariffs at any point in time, they're losing money in the meantime, by the way. Everything is not on pause. They can't just pause their brand and then revisit it in 2 years when supposedly infrastructure has been built. So, you know, we're going to have to see, and I'm going to be looking very curiously to see exactly how things are going to change. You've got 26% on South Korea, Taiwan, 32%. That makes a lot of sense. Although, something that's weird about this massive tariff on Taiwan, which is why I do want to see what exceptions Trump will make, because he will have to make exceptions eventually. Taiwan is a big region for the US because the US imports a lot of things from Taiwan, like a lot, especially when it comes to like the tech company, a lot of the microchips. And that's a big reason actually why the US fights wars on behalf of Taiwan against China, because they want to, you know, actually be a part of the microchips and, you know, continue to trade with Taiwan. And if China has too much, you know, power and strength over Taiwan, then the US won't get all those favorable deals. So that's actually strange to see that 32% tariff on Taiwan. That's odd. India is another big region for production in the fashion industry. Thailand is also a big region that's affected. Algeria, 30%. Interesting. Angola, 32%. Bangladesh, another huge region. Huge region. So that'll be interesting to see. That'll be interesting. Jude is saying we are reliant on Taiwan for chips, which is why we're moving manufacturing to the US, i.e. the CHIPS Act. Yes, but once again, and the problem with these kind of conversations is, oh yeah, this is why we're moving production. Okay, how long will that take? How much does that cost? These are the questions you need to ask. And if you can't answer them, how much does it cost to move the infrastructure completely from Taiwan to the US so that the US is not reliant on Taiwan for the chips? How long will that take? How much will that cost? The reason why these two questions need to be answered is because when you think about it, depending on how long this takes, that's how long these companies have to try and survive while these tariffs are super high. Otherwise, they fold. So unless unless you can answer those questions, billions, and we've already built 2 major plants, it's fully in process. Yes, it's in process. It's in process. It's literally in process, though. Yeah, he is misrepresenting the CHIPS Act. It was started by Biden and killed by Trump. Yeah, exactly. The CHIP Act was halted by Trump too. He's actively stopping us from even subsidizing the US to build our own chip factories. And that's why, like I've said, you have to ask these questions. And until these questions can be answered, and I find it quite funny because the people that argue for these things are probably the most affected. Like the people that are like, oh, it's already in place, it's going to be built. Meanwhile, your cars are going to cost double. You won't be able to afford a car. You literally won't be able to afford a car yourself. A lot of your American companies will fold in the meantime while they're building this infrastructure that is supposedly being promised. And you know the way that things happen. When governments say, oh, this infrastructure will be built in 4 years, it actually means 8 to 10 years, to be very honest with you. That's just how these things work. Who do you think will be more affected, fast fashion or luxury fashion? Definitely fast fashion, for sure. And we've seen so many fast fashion brands already folding anyway. One good thing I think that is coming out of all of this is sustainability, and it's going to stifle the impact of Shein and Temu because, of course, they have been taking advantage of that de minimis loophole where, orders below $800 aren't taxed the same. Therefore, they could just decimate the market by just importing and exporting really cheap goods. And that's how they were able to outperform a lot of the fast fashion brands globally, but in the US too. And that's why you see a lot of these fast fashion brands closing down. We've talked about Forever 21 recently. A lot of other fast fashion brands have really suffered. So that's a good thing, that this is going to really stifle the growth of those companies, because I think that their practices are horrible. They produce clothing that is terrible for the environment. A lot of it is going to end up in landfills. It leads to a lot of waste globally. So that's a definite positive to come out of all of this, to be honest. Back to repeating clothes like normal people, less pollution too. That's the thing. That's the thing. But I don't think I don't know if it's going to change consumer spending or consumer actions, to be honest, because if we use a recent case study to try and inform us on how this is going to go, COVID was a time of economic downturn. Many people suffered. A lot of people were like, yeah, especially in the fashion industry, they were like, we're going to slow down. Fashion needs to slow down. We need to have a reckoning day in fashion. We need to stop overproducing. We need to change the way we produce. And the second that COVID ended and stuff started to rise again economically, people started to get jobs again, consumers went back to normal. So I don't know if consumer spending really changes that much in the long term. It might change in the short term, but I don't know if once the effects of this have been balanced out and people get used to it and all the companies have pivoted, people are just going to go back to normal, to be honest. People are just going to produce as normal, overproduce as normal, and everything will, be that way, to be honest. RIP all the Shein stores that opened in California. To be fair, I'm very happy that this is going to be a rough time for Shein. That's the one positive out of all of this. The Chinese fast fashion brands, they need to be destroyed, honestly. They need to be decimated, removed from the planet, they need to be ceased from producing. They shouldn't be allowed to produce clothing. So that's the one big positive out of all of this. The greatest effects will be on the US dollar and trade agreements in the future. The euro will be more willing to partner with China at this rate. Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. And obviously, the US, you can't downplay the impact and the power of the US. The US is extremely important to the global economy, but so is China. And if the US forces the hand of the likes of the EU, many other big regions that are also really important, then they will just sidestep and all make deals with China, and that will just void the impact of the US on the economy. I think these decisions are being made based on an assumption that, so many countries will continue to be trade allies with the US and they won't switch gears and, work with China more and stuff like that. big assumptions, to be honest. Jennifer says, I think it depends on how deep the recession is. If people go right back to bad habits, that is true, to be honest. That's very true. If the recession is as deep as the Great Depression, that took 2 generations to change. True. Do you think this will change the fashion direction? Will people buy more tops or bottoms? Is formal wear going to be important in time of economic hardship? So what I think will happen, to be honest, is I think so my thought process is that considering certain regions are less affected than others, and I can imagine that a lot of companies are just going to move to countries that are less affected. So I said, countries like Turkey, that is very known for producing high quality goods. We're going to see a lot of companies producing more there. However, Turkey specializes in very specific things like denim and sometimes knitwear and stuff like that. So we might just see brands changing what they produce entirely. So let's say in Vietnam, there's more like futuristic technology in terms of sportswear, which is actually how it is. We're just going to see brands do less of this futuristic fashion forward sportswear and just make more knitwear and denim instead. So I think the kind of garments that people produce, especially in the short term, until they can work out exactly how they're going to deal with these tariffs, I think that's exactly what's going to happen moving forward. This is also a thing that I've seen going on. So I've seen a lot of Canadians, especially, boycott a lot of American brands and companies. I've seen in Canada a really big movement of people trying their best not to consume American goods and services, which is interesting. We'll see if that will have an impact on the American economy. I don't really think it's going to have that much of an impact, to be honest. The American economy is humongous. But yeah, avoid the impact is a massive overstatement. Yeah, obviously I'm exaggerating. What I mean by avoid the impact is like it will reduce the impact of the American economy on the rest of the world if people are less reliant on it or American imports and exports. Do you think this will help move more jobs and manufacturing to the US, or is Trump just killing America day by day? I think we just need to see. So obviously I've spoken about my analysis and like questions. I've posed questions that need to be answered that I don't think anyone has the answers to, even though people claim they do. But I think we just need to see how it plans out, what trade deals people actually sign. This is really just an update on what has happened. We need to observe kind of where the markets go. What a lot of countries, haven't even retaliated yet. They are planning to. So we need to see what they do in retaliation and how that affects the US economy. So, we just need to see. He's talking about running for the 3rd time. That's who you're dealing with. Laws don't exist. Approval ratings don't exist. You have someone in the chat that's a specimen who votes in. Oh my god. I don't think anyone should be judged for supporting Trump or whatever. In terms of like, we're in a free world. People are, free to have whatever political leanings that they have. My issue is just, if you're a Trump supporter, you have to actually answer the questions I'm posing. Otherwise, what exactly are you fighting for if you don't even know what this thing is going to cost, how long it's going to take to build the infrastructure, and how do you think companies will survive in the interim? It's having an impact on people, should definitely be judged for their tourism already. Are you existing in the UK? You don't understand how bad it is in here. You haven't talked to them. What are you talking about, Trump supporters? I think it also depends, because I think on both sides, once again, I consider myself politically a centrist, right? And as someone that observes politics, on the left and on the right, there are people that are extreme. There are people that I see on the left that have they say things and you're like, that makes no sense. And then there's people on the right that say things and you're like, that makes no sense. So I don't want to push a narrative where it's like, only this side can ever be wrong and this side is always right every single time, because that's not really a critical way of seeing things, to be honest. And I like, at least on my channel, to promote, don't just surround yourself with opinions that agree with your worldview. You might learn something by speaking to someone from a different political leaning. So, try to be open-minded, guys. Let's see. How do you see these tariffs affecting Lesotho? The country was hit with 99% tariffs, and they mostly produce textiles for the US. Like, there's no reason but just to bully/exploit the country. Well, they claim that they will be able to move all of that production to the US, which I definitely don't agree with. So yeah, I just think it's not, going to work. Someone is saying you forgot about the social policies of Trump supporters. Yeah, so obviously now we're talking about economics. If you look at like the social policies, then obviously it makes sense why you would or wouldn't support him based on how that affects you personally. So for example, I can imagine that, let's say you're part of the trans community, obviously you wouldn't support Trump because that's basically like supporting what literally works against your existence and is fighting to be against your existence. So in that case, obviously it makes sense. But if we're talking about economics, that's a totally different conversation, which is the conversation we're having right now. So there's no left in the US. They're center-right at most. I don't agree with that. I think there's a left in the US. Since NYC is a major fashion hub in the US, do you think international brands will stop promoting their products in New York? No, because once again, going back to the importance of America on the luxury market, when you look at financial reports and you look at like what the markets are when they divide it by markets, the US is still a massive share. Yes, Asia makes up the lion's share of consumers for most of these luxury companies, but the US does have a big chunk. There's a lot of money in the US. Companies can't just, wake up one day and be like, yeah, we're just going to stop promoting our products in the US. That wouldn't make any sense, especially not in the short term, to be honest. I don't think that's going to happen. They're going to lose too much money, especially the bigger conglomerates. That wouldn't make any sense for them at all. So yeah, I don't think that's going to happen, if I'm very honest with you. I personally believe the quality will go up and fast fashion will die down. Based on production going where? Based on production going where? I work in NYC fashion, specifically in handbags, and it's a complete free fall. Damn, that's crazy. Yeah, I just find it really fascinating that, because when you look at like things like this, right, like the tariffs, you have to see it from all angles, right? You have to see it from how will this affect the US economy if this country does that. But from Trump supporters, unfortunately, from what I've seen from a lot of them are going on the assumption that everything that Trump is doing is a positive and there could be no drawbacks, when so many well-respected economic analysts are saying that it could lead to a recession, it could decimate the US economy, it could really affect very specific industries like the automotive industry, the fashion industry, especially if they can't build the infrastructure in the US quick enough. So I just find it weird that a lot of the conversations is very much either it's the perfect thing and any other opinion is dumb, or nothing's going to work. I think some things could work, some things might not, but I think if we're talking about the fashion industry specifically, which is what I focus on, I think it's a net negative overall for sure. It's definitely a net negative for the fashion industry, and I think the fashion industry is going to be heavily affected. Io, interesting to hear you talk from a Euro/UK perspective. Being here in Canada and seeing it all so close is mind-blowing. Yeah, I can imagine, to be honest. I can really imagine. It's blind faith. They believe in Trump and have low tolerance for dissent. I just think it's weird because a lot of these tariffs, and I said this before, I'll say it again, they are going under an assumption that other countries don't have the power to really affect the outcome of the US economy. It's going based on the assumption that we're just going to impose these tariffs on these countries and they basically have no choice but to start producing in the US. And when it could backfire is if they don't start producing in the US, they don't start building infrastructure in the US, that will really backfire. Like seriously backfire, and then it would affect US companies that are mainly based in the US that are forced into being the ones that have to spend all the money because other companies aren't. So yeah, Klarna's business about to start booming. That's funny. Oh my god, this is crazy. America needs a hard left president who will tell poor people that they're stupid. Jesus Christ, Luke. What the hell? I don't really know where you're going with this, Luke. However, if you're talking about the US, what I've observed in the US is it's kind of like a strange, I think it's like a US thing. And you guys that are American in the chat, let me know if my analysis is correct. But from what I've analyzed, because I don't know where Luke is going at with that, but let me say what I think he's alluding to. So in the US, a lot of working class Americans vote and fight for things that are against their best interest. And from someone from the UK observing it, it's always really weird. Like Americans will fight against like the government paying for healthcare, but working class Americans can't afford healthcare. And working class Americans can't even take an ambulance. Like in the US, a lot of people, if someone shoots them in the leg or they're in the middle of, a shooting, which happens in a lot of working class areas in the US, they can't even call an ambulance because they can't afford it. So they have to find a way to get to the hospital one way or another. Or sometimes they don't even go to the hospital. They kind of just have to find a way to kind of deal with it. There's people that have broken legs and it's never really fixed because they can't afford the medical bills. But then they actively fight against policies that would mean that wouldn't be the case in the future. So observing the US, I think that's what Luke is alluding to. The way he said it is just not the way I would say it. Like he said, what did he say? He said, what did he say exactly? Tell poor people that they are stupid. That's insane, the way it's worded. But a lot, and not even just that, I think, so from what I've observed, a lot of working class Americans fight for policies that are under the assumption that they'll be rich in the future. So you'll see like the typical working class American will fight for policies that favor the middle class and the upper class because they are under a pretense that very soon, because it's the American dream, right? They're under the pretense that one day, very soon, I shall be part of the middle class or the upper class. So therefore, I'm going to fight for policies that benefit them because I'm going to be a part of that class moving forward. So that's something I've observed, but that's my outside looking in observation. But Americans in the chat, let me know. I'm curious to get your thoughts on what you think about that. Let me see, because I know most of my audience is American, so you guys would know more than me. That's just kind of my opinion. Let's see. It's almost certainly a problem of a lack of education, common miseducation. That's a fund by these right-wing populist messages. Okay, let's go on. It's not the people necessarily. They are bombarded with propaganda by traditional media and social media. Let's see. That sounds like something you read on TikTok. Americans have much more disposable income than most Europeans. Oh my God. Jude, Americans have, so let me respond to this. Americans are definitely richer. Well, the average American, I think, has more money than the average European for sure. As someone that's based in the UK, I just think that most Americans are just rich. However, that doesn't really tally, even though on paper they have more disposable income. If the cost of living is so high because you have to pay for health insurance and like all these things, it ends up balancing out very quickly. So just because you have more disposable income, it doesn't really, because when they do these disposable income, like when you look at it, like how they calculate disposable income, it doesn't take into account a lot of medical fees and stuff like that. And that's where the disparity is, and that's what balances the deficit. But let me read what you guys are saying, what my fellow Americans are saying in the chat about my analysis. So on one front, someone earlier said that emergency visits are free in the US, and now someone is saying emergency visits are not free in the US. They cost several thousands, and even with insurance, it will at minimum cost you $1,000 out of pocket. So Americans are not even in agreement as to what it costs in terms of emergencies in the US. My understanding is that it costs money. It's not free. But let's see what else you guys are saying. Let's understand. The reasoning is I always hear is people don't want taxes increased to pay for these programs, even though they stand to directly benefit. Interesting. 50% of Americans have less than $500 in their savings account. That's also true. Yes, the American cost of living is insane. That's facts. America definitely pays a lot more than, say, the UK on average. Yeah, exactly, which is why I was like, you can earn more, but if it costs more, it's basically the same thing. Americans have bad money management and an issue with over-consuming. I mentioned this earlier, right? That what surprises me about the US is how easy it is to access credit. Like, I have so many friends in the US, and when they tell me how easy it is to access like really high levels of credit, I'm like, wow, that's insane. Like in the UK, you wouldn't just be given access to crazy amounts of credit like that. Let's see. The thing about American politics at the moment is that whether people want to admit it or not, the Heritage Foundation has unfortunately established a foothold in the White House, which is very scary for everyone. Let's see. In the US, we have a long history of propaganda against left-wing movements, Red Scare, proxy war, assassinations of communist groups, etc. And the average American carries more debt than most Europeans. America's weird when it comes to other countries' mentality is around stay out of my way, but that does bite us in the arse a lot. Most Americans live paycheck to paycheck, no matter if you live in an apartment or a gated community. Someone is saying quality of life is way better in Europe than in America. I feel like I started an America versus Europe war. That's not my intention. However, it's just an observation because I was basically alluding to what Luke said in the chat. That's kind of what I thought he meant, right? There'll be many more policies that don't make sense in the coming months and years, like abolishing the Department of Education. Yeah, that's also another thing, like reducing funding in the education system is a bit crazy, but conversation for another day. Right, medical bankruptcy is a foreign concept in Europe, but it's the most common form of bankruptcy in the US. I mean, even if you look at socially, for example, there's obviously a very big case when it comes to Luigi Mangione, which has opened conversations around the healthcare system in the US and kind of the effect of it and why it should be changed and why in certain aspects is inhumane that, you know, people's safety and ability to live comfortably and have access to good healthcare is weighing on, you know, insurance companies that can at the drop of a bucket just refuse to pay out for whatever reason that they choose. That's like a massive conversation being had in the US right now. Jennifer says it is absolutely not free and hospitals will bill you forever. I'm going with Jennifer because Jennifer has been in the US for a very long time and also one of my close friends. So I trust her that the Americans earlier were claiming that emergencies are free in the US, which is definitely not my understanding. And it's not like I haven't been to I've been to the US like 15 times. I've been to the country and seen things myself, right? It's not like I'm just sat in the UK and I've never been to the US and I don't know anything about the US, right? Let's see. Also, the state subsidies certain public welfare programs, but the citizens complain about the taxes. Like some hospitals don't prioritize those on the state insurance versus private. I mean, 73% of Americans expect a price surge under the Trump tariffs. Of course, 57% of Americans oppose the new tariffs. You have 52% of people that agree with Trump's trade partners that they take advantage of the US. And then half of the people believe that the short-term pain will make the US stronger long-term, which is interesting to see kind of what people's opinions are. I'd love to see a poll, maybe like a year from now, on the same topics, just to see how, because it's similar to like, you know, the UK, right? Where the polls pre-Brexit and post-Brexit completely different. Like completely different, to be honest. Also, by the way, this is something I agree with about Americans' gripe with certain taxes being used to like fund healthcare and stuff like that. I think this is like a genuine concern that a lot of Americans have, where it's like, okay, if we are taxed more and that money is going to healthcare, how is that money going to be spent? And is it going to be spent efficiently, sorry? Because if it's not spent efficiently, we're basically paying more to not get what we are paying for. I do think that's definitely like a valid concern. It's definitely valid. As a clip from a number of years ago of Trump on Letterman as a guest promoting his clothing line, the signs were there, folks. The signs were there. Yeah, I'm not taking the polls as fact. Polls are just kind of what people think based on what they've read or, you know, what they've consumed. But I think it's fascinating to know kind of how people think and then how their opinion changes based on things that change in the economy. So let's see. But reading on, just based on the polls, I want to see what some people have said. Some 39% of respondents supported the new tariffs, and 52% said they agreed with the Trump administration's argument that other countries have been taking advantage of the US when it comes to international trade. Trump frequently cites that view as a reason to enact new trade barriers, saying they will lead to a boom in US manufacturing. 42% of respondents said that they disagreed with that view. Americans have mostly split along partisan lines on whether higher tariffs are a good idea. Half of respondents, including almost all Republicans, said they agreed with a statement that any short economic pain is worth it to make the US stronger in the long term. The other half, including almost all Democrats, disagreed. This is exactly what I was talking about, where a lot of people just stick with their political leanings and just stay there. Because that's quite funny. All Republicans basically are like, it's good. And all Democrats are like, it's bad. That's typical. That's typical. Another great article that's great to check out via BOF is this graph, which shows how luxury stocks have dropped following Trump's announcement. So you can see LVMH, Richemont, and Kering, all of them tanked. Obviously, Kering was the worst out of all of them, to be honest. Kering has been... I feel it for Kering because Kering has just seen it go from bad to worse. Their stock shares went down based on the terrible performance of Gucci and the announcement of their 2024 financial report. And now the tariffs, and it's gone even lower, and it just keeps going lower. It's sad. I think that Demna, being the creative director of Gucci, is insane. Like the Kering's future is literally weighing on his shoulders, which is crazy to say, which is so much responsibility, but it kind of is, to be honest. It really, really is. It really, really is. I get that he wants a rise in US manufacturing, but why not doing it slowly, giving companies some time? Why should this be so rapidly done? Yeah, I'm with you on this. I think normally if you want to implement this change, what he should have done, I think the best way to do it would have been to tell people the tariffs that you're putting in place and then give companies 6 months to a year to make their necessary changes before the tariffs, are put in place, rather than just kind of doing it so quickly. Because normally when you do things quickly, it means not that much thought has gone into it, to be very honest. And then this is true because he has only 4 years. There's no long-term politics. So I've talked about this before. We're talking a lot about politics, not so much about fashion, but I've talked a lot about this before. But one of my reasons for being a centrist is that, my issue with the way that politics, is just in general, is that a lot of presidents, a lot of leaders, they have terms. And when you have terms, you want to kind of make your mark and, imprint your legacy in the 4 years that you have or whatever. And so there's no continuity with a lot of policies. It's normally just this person comes in, and especially if they're from a political party that opposes the political party that was just in power. I think most countries would benefit from continuity in a lot of policies, them fine-tuning a lot of things, but that doesn't happen in a lot of political systems because it's just removing this policy and bringing in new ones for 4 years and then removing those and then bringing in new ones for 4 years. So nothing good ever comes from it. Nothing is built upon for years and years and years and years and years. And it doesn't do anyone any good. So my overall frustration with just political parties and political systems, that really annoys me. I really don't like that. I hate that, to be honest. We are in this mess because the Republicans that voted for Trump are uneducated. Damn. I think some Trump voters are educated. I don't think all of them are uneducated. I don't like this opinion that, if you support so-and-so person, you just have no common sense or you're not smart. Some people just vote in their best interest. Some people voted for Trump because they own big businesses and they know that Trump favors, well, not with the tariffs, but for the most part, Trump favors businesses. He puts things in place that benefits business and commerce. So if you run a big business, you're just voting in your best interest. It's very selfish voting, which is what voting is. You vote for your selfish goals, I guess. So I don't think those people are stupid. I think those people are very educated. They read the reports, actually, and they voted for Trump because it's in their best interest. But yeah, I think a lot of people that voted for Trump, though, on the flip side, definitely voted against their own personal interest, but they don't actually realize that. But I wouldn't say all of Trump supporters. I wouldn't say that. That's class solidarity. Yeah, there's no such thing. There is no such thing, to be honest. There's completely no such thing. No such thing. Yes, people are very selfish in the way that they vote. I don't think a lot of people vote for the greater good. Some people do, but I don't think most people do. Most people vote for their own personal reasons, and sometimes it backfires because they don't do their research properly. Someone said most Republicans are racist. Probably, which is why, once again, I still think that people are still voting for their own personal reasons, right? So I can draw parallels to UK politics with US politics. So I can imagine that a lot of Republicans voted for Trump because, let's say, a lot of them are racist. So they are very supportive of, get the immigrants out, which is like a similar narrative to the UK, without considering any of the economic drawbacks to what they were fighting for. So a good example, drawing parallels to the UK, a lot of people voted for Brexit because it's all about my Britain, my England, we control the borders, blah, 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 without considering like the economic impact that Brexit would have. And once Brexit happened, so many companies were on their knees. So many companies left the UK. The UK has seen a record number of millionaires leave the UK, which is like creating a big deficit in terms of taxes and stuff like that. A lot of that is to do with Brexit and businesses being more advantageous operating in the EU. We saw a lot of companies move their production to Ireland because Ireland is part of the EU for trade purposes. So once again, people vote for their own personal reasons, but a lot of people just don't look at the bigger picture or consider like the economic impact because they're just thinking about, get the immigrants out and stuff like that. So that's kind of what happens in politics. But that we see that all the time. It happens so often. It happened in the UK. It's happening in many other countries. It's going to happen in the US. So it's just kind of it's kind of what happens. It's kind of what happens. This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind-the-scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club, where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.